I've owned the Shields Date Gardens for over a third of a century. This date garden is one of the oldest and most interesting in America. Shields dates are now recognized among the world's finest. The Shields Date Garden is the only place in the world where you can see and hear the romance and sex life of the date.
Shields Date Garden first opened on Highway 111 in Indio on Christmas Day, 1924. Many things have changed since then, but the commitment of Shields Date Garden to cultivating unique varieties of the very highest quality dates remains to this day. Shields Date Garden is now, more than 80 years later, a unique haven for local nostalgia of years past. Floyd Shields was born in Des Moines, Iowa, and educated as a mining engineer in Montana. Bess was from Kansas, but moved to California to become a teacher. The two met in Long Beach. As newlyweds, the Shields left Los Angeles and headed to the desert to try their hand at the new date industry developing in the Coachella Valley. Neither had any previous ranching experience. When they arrived, the town of Indio had approximately 500 residents, but it was still very isolated, and still very much in the middle of the desert. The date is perhaps the oldest known cultivated tree crop, and has been an important food for people for over 6,000 years, growing best in very hot, dry environments where water is plentiful. Dates flourished natively in the ancient world across the Middle East and northern Africa. Spanish conquistadors were the first to introduce dates to the Western Hemisphere, but these early date gardens failed to produce much fruit because most Spanish settlements at that time were near the coast where humidity is far too high for successful date growth. It was not until the early 20th century that commercial date production came to the United States. To Americans traveling west for the California Gold Rush in 1849, the area between the Colorado River to the east and the San Jacinto and Santa Rosa Mountains to the west was known as the Salton Basin and was a dreaded obstacle. In 1877, the Southern Pacific Railroad established a station at Indio as a stop on the main southern line between New Orleans and Los Angeles. Around the same time, some early pioneers discovered artesian wells in what is now the city of Mecca. And it was soon apparent that nearly every crop would grow well in the nutrient-rich soil of this ancient ocean floor. We just had to add water. In 1905, the Colorado River broke a dike in Imperial County, and for 2 years flowed non-stop into the salt-covered desert, flooding the towns of Salton and Woodspur, and creating the Salton Sea. One of the buildings threatened by the rising water of the new Salton Sea was the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Date Experimentation Station in Mecca, established in 1904 to test the viability of commercial date production in the U.S. It was soon obvious that date palms thrived in the hot, dry environment of the Coachella Valley. Between 1890 and 1915, several commercial date crops were successfully imported from the Middle East and North Africa to the California desert by the USDA and the Coachella Valley Date Growers Association. Most commercial dates sold in the U.S. today trace their origin to the offshoots imported during this period. In the decades following the turn of the century, the Coachella Valley date industry enjoyed explosive growth. In 1921, the Indio Date Festival was inaugurated to celebrate the date industry, its cultural history, and Middle Eastern origin, a February tradition that continues to this day. Floyd and Bess Shields arrived in the Coachella Valley in 1924, a time when the date industry was alive and well. Date shops and fruit stands lined the highway from Palm Springs to Indio, all vying for the attention of passing tourists. The Shields must have known that to find success in this new and competitive industry, they had to stand out from the crowd. To draw the attention of visiting tourists, and to promote his unique commitment to date cultivation, Floyd Shields offered lectures in the back garden throughout the 1940s and 50s that described the painstaking process of date cultivation. Eventually, his lecture evolved into a slideshow and a recorded soundtrack that played on a continual basis. He titled this presentation, "The Romance and Sex Life of the Date," a very challenging title for that time. Mr. Shields was also a pioneer in breeding his own hybrid dates, such as Shields blonde and brunette dates, which are to this day available exclusively at Shields Date Garden. Of the 119 kinds of dates that have been grown in Shields Date Garden over the years, only one variety was imported from the Old World. All others were originated here and can be found nowhere else. In 1936, Mr. Shields developed and patented a completely new invention called date crystals, the key ingredient in Shields' famous date shakes. We'll let Mr. Shields himself explain.
After 18 months of trial and error, I perfected my triple process. And Shields Date Crystals and Shields Date Sugar were born. Not a byproduct, any more than the finest creamery butter is a byproduct of milk, but a wonderful new product made entirely of choice tree-ripened dates, 100% pure.
By the mid-1940s, Shields Date Garden had become quite successful, attracting tourists passing on the highway between Palm Springs and the new resorts at the Salton Sea. The current showroom on Highway 111 was built in 1950. The famous night in 1953. People came to Shields to learn about date cultivation and tour the gardens. But most of all, they came for the dates. To say that dates are difficult to grow is a remarkable understatement. Commercial date palms take 15 years to mature and require an astonishing investment of natural resources and human labor. To really explain the nature of date cultivation, we turn to a perennial expert in the field, Mr. Floyd Shields.
Not many people realize that growing the finest dates in the world is the most expensive crop to produce. Every time a date seed is planted, a new kind of date is originated. The only way to perpetuate a variety is to propagate its offshoots. A date palm produces at or near its base 5 to 25 offshoots or suckers during the first 10 or 15 years of its life. It usually requires from 5 to 10 years for an offshoot to develop a root system of its own. These offshoots are cut from the parent palm and are planted 48 females and 1 male palm per acre. After it's planted, it requires an additional 8 to 15 years to bring it into full bearing. I wouldn't expect any returns from the little great-great-granddaughter under 20 years. Another interesting feature about the date palm is the fact that nature made no adequate provision to pollinate the female date blooms. Back as far as we have any record of dates, man has cut the male flowers from the male palm and placed them in the tops of the female palms. I doubt if there have been any truly wild date gardens in the world for thousands of years. The large, good-looking flower that I'm holding is the male flower from the male palm, and the other one is the female bloom from the female palm. A large male flower will produce about half a teacup of pollen. Throughout the pollinating season, we visit each male palm the first thing every morning and cut off the flowers that have opened during the night. Shake out the pollen, and collected in small cotton powder puffs, and use these puffs to pollinate the female blooms. On each of the little berries on the female bloom, there are 3 tiny tentacles, which are moist with sap when the bloom opens. One must get the pollen from the male flower in contact with this sap. Otherwise, the dates do not develop seed, and without the seed, they do not sugar up and mature properly. When the fruit reaches the size of small olives, it's time to thin by cutting out the center of each fruit bunch, leaving only the amount of fruit on each palm that we know from experience that individual palm is able to mature. After the bunches are thinned, they're tied to the leaves to prevent the stems breaking from the additional weight of the fruit bunches as the dates mature. This thinning gives us fewer dates of better quality. In spite of the fact that the date palm is a desert plant, it requires as much water as a willow. We use 10 acre-feet of water a year, which is the equivalent of 120 inches of rainfall. This water comes from deep wells and also the All-American Canal. This canal brings the water 209 miles from the Colorado River through an open ditch. We flood our date gardens every week or 10 days. While we keep our date gardens wringing wet, at least 10 feet deep at all times, rain is the date's worst enemy. In order to protect the fruit as much as possible from rain damage, we cover each bunch of dates with waterproof covers. These covers are put on the last week in August when the fruit starts to color and left there until the dates are all picked. The dates begin to ripen about the 1st of September, and from then on until Christmas, the fruit is picked once a week. A bunch of dates cannot be cut like a bunch of bananas. Inasmuch as all of the dates on a bunch do not ripen at the same time, they must be picked individually as they ripen. After the dates are picked, they're thoroughly cleaned, graded, and packed under the most sanitary conditions. We do the preliminary grading on a moving conveyor belt, but the final grading is always done on tables. We find this to be the only way accurate grades can be maintained. In fact, odd as it may seem, it's possible for all of these grades to be produced by the same palm, and expert grading and selection to see that each date is placed in its proper grade. This difference is in the quality, flavor, and texture of the date, not in the size. After the dates are picked, we cut off the empty fruit stems and the old leaves that have ceased to function. After the date gardens are cleaned up, it's time to de-thorn all the new leaves that the palm has put out during the past year. These thorns, which grow along the edges of the new leaf stems, must be removed so they'll not injure the men when they pollinate the new blossoms. No doubt you've noticed that we've put permanent ladders on all of our palms to make it easier for the men to climb them. These ladders are moved up every 2 or 3 years, and additional sections are hung below as the palms grow taller.
Today, the Coachella Valley produces more than 30 million pounds of dates annually, which accounts for nearly 95% of all dates grown in the U.S. Shields Date Garden offers 5 general types of dates, each containing multiple subtypes. Deglet Nor is a semi-dry, sweet date that keeps very well and is easy to ship. Blonde and brunette dates are medium-sweet, soft dates that Mr. Shields began developing in 1927. Blonde and brunette dates are available only at Shields Date Garden. Thori dates are chewy and are the only dry date variety grown in the U.S. Medjool dates are the undisputed royalty of the entire date family. Their rich and soft texture is a result of the effort required to grow them. Dates will generally keep for 15 to 20 days if kept cool. However, they will keep much longer if transferred to an airtight container, where dates can last comfortably for 1 year in the refrigerator and up to 5 years in the freezer. Nearly all Shields Date Garden products can be tasted on our premises and are also available online at shieldsdates.com. Both online and in-store purchases can be shipped anywhere in the world. The Coachella Valley has changed since Mr. and Mrs. Shields arrived in 1924. Shields Date Garden, however, remains in the same location on Highway 111, where it carries on producing the very highest quality dates 7 days a week. Many of our dates are unique varieties available exclusively here, at the exact location where they were developed by Mr. Shields over 80 years ago. And with one final word, once again, Mr. Floyd Shields.
I've owned the Shields Date Gardens for over a third of a century, and in all that time, I've never been able to get up in the morning and say, "Thank goodness, we have nothing to do today." The Shields Date Gardens is the only place in the world where you can see and hear the romance and sex life of the date, and learn about date culture in such a short time.